Two self-made millionaires are forced to confront the ghosts of their pasts when a stolen heirloom and a forgotten photograph expose buried family ties. Their journeys, one ignited by accusation, the other by a chance discovery. Nathan Prescott was the epitome of wealth and success. Having built a thriving investment empire from scratch, his life was a showcase of opulence. His sprawling estate, perched on a secluded hill, boasted intricate gardens, private pools, and art collections that only the richest could afford. But behind the grandeur, Nathan lived an isolated existence. His days were meticulously scheduled, dominated by board meetings and financial projections, leaving no room for personal connections. Deep in his heart, he carried a wound. He rarely spoke of the death of his sister Claire, years ago in a tragic accident that left him riddled with regret. On the other side of town, Ruby Hayes was a single mother doing everything she could to make ends meet. Raising her lively 9-year-old daughter Lily, Ruby worked tirelessly as a waitress by day and a janitor by night. Her ultimate dream was to secure a better future for Lily, free from the struggles she endured growing up. When Ruby received an offer to work as a maid in Nathan Prescott's estate, she saw it as a golden opportunity to improve their lives. Little did she know, the job would pull her into a world far more complicated than she could imagine. From the moment Ruby set foot on the estate, she felt out of place. The towering gates, manicured lawns, and grand entrance were unlike anything she had ever known. The housekeeper, Mrs. Lennox, greeted her at the door with a steely gaze and an air of authority. "Punctuality and discretion are non-negotiable," she said firmly, handing Ruby a detailed schedule. Despite the daunting rules, Ruby's resolve never wavered. She was here for Lily, and determined to make this work. Nathan, on the other hand, barely acknowledged Ruby's arrival. Focused entirely on his business dealings, he left the management of his household to Mrs. Lennox. Ruby's days were spent cleaning endless rooms, polishing expensive decor, and tiptoeing through the silent corridors of a house that felt more like a museum than a home. One afternoon, while dusting a bookshelf in Nathan's study, Ruby came across an old photograph tucked between two leather-bound books. The picture showed a young Nathan with a smiling woman who bore a striking resemblance to Ruby's late husband, Aaron. She froze, her breath catching as memories of Aaron flooded back. Though Ruby quickly replaced the photo, questions began to stir in her mind about the man she now worked for. Ruby couldn't shake the image of the photograph she had found. She hadn't thought about Aaron in years. She's passing had left her emotionally scarred, but she had pushed through for Lily's sake. Now, seeing the man in the picture, so eerily familiar yet slightly different, filled her with unease. Who was the woman in the photo? And why did Nathan Prescott have it hidden in his study? Ruby resolved to keep her discovery to herself, unsure of how to approach the subject or whether it was even worth mentioning. Meanwhile, Nathan carried on with his life, unaware of Ruby's inner turmoil. To him, she was just another staff member, hired to ensure the smooth running of his home. But there was something about Ruby's presence that occasionally caught his attention. Her quiet determination reminded him of some, though he couldn't quite place who. It was Lily, however, who unknowingly began to bridge the gap between the two worlds. When Ruby brought her to the estate after school one day, the young girl's curiosity got the better of her. Sneaking away while her mother worked, Lily wandered into the garden, where she stumbled upon Nathan sitting alone. Her innocent question, "Why do you look so sad?" caught Nathan off guard. At first, Nathan was startled by Lily's sudden appearance. He wasn't used to children around the house, and her directness left him at a loss for words. "I am not sad," he replied curtly, but Lily tilted her head as if she didn't believe him. Before he could dismiss her, she asked another question. "Do you know my mommy?" Nathan frowned, unsure of what she meant. "She works here now," Lily continued, pointing toward the house. "She's really nice. You should talk to her." With that, Lily skipped off, leaving Nathan puzzled but strangely intrigued. Later that evening, Ruby was mortified to learn that Lily had spoken to Nathan. "You can't just wander off and talk to people without asking me first," she scolded. But Lily simply shrugged. "He looked lonely," she said matter-of-factly. Though Ruby brushed it off, her daughter's words stayed with her. As the days went on, Nathan found himself thinking about Lily's innocent observation. Was he lonely? He'd never considered Ith, had always viewed his solitary life as a necessity, a byproduct of success. But now, for the first time in years, he began to wonder if there was something missing. And, unknowingly, Ruby and Lily had begun to awaken a part of him he thought was long buried. Nathan Prescott's life, though meticulously ordered, began to feel subtly disrupted by the presence of Ruby and Lily. Their arrival brought an unfamiliar warmth to the otherwise cold, quiet estate. Lily's unfiltered curiosity and bright energy stood in stark contrast to the solemnity that had gripped the mansion for years. She would often be found exploring the gardens or peeking into rooms, her laughter echoing faintly through the halls, a sound Nathan couldn't help but notice. One afternoon, as Ruby meticulously cleaned the library, she stumbled upon an unopened letter tucked beneath a pile of papers on Nathan's desk. She resisted the urge to read it, instead neatly placing it where it belonged. But the name Claire Prescott on the envelope caught her eye. It was clear that whoever Claire was, she held significance to Nathan. That same day, Mrs. Lennox, the housekeeper, caught Ruby lingering in the study and coldly reminded her, "You are here to clean, not snoop." Ruby apologized, but the encounter left her with a growing curiosity about Nathan's life. Nathan, meanwhile, found himself drawn to Lily in an unexpected way. Her straightforwardness reminded him of Claire, his late sister, who had been the only person in his life unafraid to call him out or ask him difficult questions. Claire had been the heart of their family, and her sudden death had left a void Nathan could never fill. As Lily chattered away during their brief encounters in the garden, she unwittingly opened old wounds Nathan had long since buried. One day, while walking through the garden, Nathan noticed Lily trying to climb a small tree. "You'll hurt yourself if you keep at that," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Lily looked at him and replied, "My mommy says you have to try hard things if you want to get better. Do you ever try hard things?" The question left Nathan speechless. It had been years since anyone had challenged him, let alone a child. As Lily and Nathan's bond grew, Ruby began to notice subtle changes in her employer's demeanor. He seemed less distant, more approachable, though his interactions with her remained formal. One evening, Ruby found Nathan sitting in the garden with a chessboard, teaching Lily how to play. The sight was so unexpected that it brought tears to her eyes. For a moment, she saw a glimpse of the man Nathan could be, a man who wasn't defined by his wealth or coldness, but by the kindness he had buried beneath years of pain. As weeks went by, Ruby started to uncover more pieces of the puzzle that was Nathan Prescott. One day, while organizing a closet near the master bedroom, she found a dusty box labeled Claire's Things. Inside were childhood mementos, old photographs, and a journal. Ruby couldn't help but notice the love and admiration Claire seemed to have for her brother, evident in her scribbled notes and heartfelt entries. Ruby quickly closed the box, knowing it wasn't her place to pry, but the discovery deepened her empathy for Nathan. Meanwhile, Nathan began opening up, albeit in small ways. Over dinner one evening, he confided in Mrs. Lennox that Lily reminded him of Claire as a child, curious, bold, and full of life. "She's too young to have that kind of wisdom, isn't she?" Nathan mused. Mrs. Lennox, usually reserved, surprised him by replying, "Children see the world without all the walls we build. Perhaps that's why she reaches you in ways others can't." Ruby, however, was still struggling to balance her growing responsibilities at work with her life at home. Lily's unbridled curiosity had already caused a few awkward situations, and Ruby feared that she might overstep boundaries again. One day, when Ruby arrived to clean Nathan's office, she found Lily there, examining the same photograph Ruby had stumbled upon weeks earlier, the one of Nathan and a mysterious woman. "Mommy, doesn't he look like Daddy in this picture?" Lily asked innocently, holding up the photo. Ruby's heart skipped a beat as Nathan walked in. "Is something wrong?" Nathan asked, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Ruby holding the photograph. Panicking, Ruby stammered an apology, explaining that Lily had wandered in without her knowledge. Nathan, however, seemed less concerned about Ruby's explanation and more fixated on the photo. He took it from Lily's hands and stared at it, his expression unreadable. That evening, Nathan retreated to his study, the photograph still in hand. Memories flooded back, memories of his sister, and the day she introduced him to her best friend, Aaron Hayes. The same Aaron Hayes who, unbeknownst to Nathan, was Ruby's late husband. Nathan's mind raced as he pieced together the connection, but he chose to say nothing for now, unsure of how to confront Ruby with what he had realized. As the lines between their lives blurred, the tension in the household grew. Ruby couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan was hiding something, just as Nathan wrestled with whether to reveal the truth about his connection to her past. And as Lily continued to bring light into Nathan's life, the walls around his heart began to crumble, setting the stage for a confrontation neither Nathan nor Ruby could avoid. Nathan Prescott's mind was restless. The photograph had opened a floodgate of memories he had long buried. He remembered the days when his sister Claire was alive, her laughter filling their home and her unshakable bond with her best friend, Aaron Hayes. Aaron had been like a brother to Nathan, a source of wisdom and camaraderie during his early days as a budding entrepreneur. But they had drifted apart after Claire's tragic death, and Nathan never heard from Aaron again. Now, staring at Ruby, the resemblance between her and Aaron was undeniable. It wasn't just her features, but also her resilience and the way she carried herself, always prioritizing her child. Nathan couldn't shake the suspicion that Ruby might be connected to the Aaron Hayes he once knew, but he chose to remain silent, unsure of how to approach her without reopening wounds for both of them. Ruby, on the other hand, felt the tension growing. Nathan's demeanor had shifted ever so slightly. He no longer avoided her completely, but his glances lingered. His tone softened, and there was a weight in his eyes that she couldn't decipher. Still, she focused on her work and her promise to give Lily a better life. The breakthrough came one afternoon, when Lily ventured into Nathan's private Gardena space he had meticulously cultivated but rarely allowed others to visit. To his surprise, Lily asked if she could help him plant flowers. For a moment, Nathan hesitated, but her eager smile melted his defenses. "All right," he said, handing her a pair of gloves that dwarfed her tiny hands. As they worked side by side, Lily peppered him with questions about his plants, his life, and his favorite memories. "I don't have many favorite memories," he admitted, his voice barely audible. But Lily's cheerful response, "Then we'll make new ones," left him speechless. As days turned into weeks, Nathan found himself drawn to the simple joy of spending time with Lily. She reminded him of the innocence he had lost and the family he had pushed away. Ruby noticed the growing bond and couldn't help but feel a mix of gratitude and apprehension. Nathan's interest in Lily was kind, even fatherly, but it also felt deeply personal, as if he saw something in Lily that Ruby didn't fully understand. One evening, while cleaning the library, Ruby found an open notebook on Nathan's desk. Scrawled across the page were ideas for a children's foundation, a project to provide education and opportunities for underprivileged kids. The idea touched her deeply, but it also raised questions. Why, after years of isolation, was Nathan suddenly interested in such a cause? And how much of that interest stemmed from Lily's presence in his life? The growing connection between Nathan, Ruby, and Lily didn't go unnoticed by Mrs. Lennox. Though fiercely loyal to Nathan, the housekeeper was skeptical of Ruby's intentions. One evening, as Ruby prepared to leave, Mrs. Lennox cornered her near the kitchen. "You should remember your place," she warned, her tone cold. "Mr. Prescott is a man of status, and this house has rules for a reason." Ruby was stunned but refused to be intimidated. "I am just here to do my job," she replied firmly. Still, the exchange left her unsettled, and she began to wonder if her presence in Nathan's life was causing more trouble than good. Meanwhile, Nathan struggled with his own turmoil. The more time he spent with Lily, the more he saw echoes of Aaron in her determination and wit. His suspicions grew, but he lacked the courage to confront Ruby about her past. Instead, he buried himself in work, throwing his energy into the plans for the Children's Foundation. He even reached out to Miss Evelyn Grant, his late sister's mentor and a retired philanthropist, for advice. Evelyn, an elegant and wise woman in her 60s, had always been a guiding presence in Nathan's life. "You are changing, Nathan," Evelyn said during one of their meetings, "and I can see it's because of that little girl and her mother. Don't fight it. Sometimes the people we least expect bring us the most clarity." Her words lingered with Nathan long after their conversation. Ruby's world, however, was about to take another unexpected turn. While sorting through old belongings in the storage room one evening, she stumbled upon a ledger that appeared to be a record of Nathan's charitable donations. The entries spanned years and included sizable amounts given to orphanages, scholarships, and hospitals, all in the name of Claire's legacy. Touched by his generosity, Ruby began to see Nathan in a new light. He wasn't just a cold and distant businessman. He was a man deeply affected by loss, channeling his grief into acts of kindness. But Nathan's walls hadn't come down entirely. One fateful morning, as Ruby arrived for work, she was greeted by an unexpected sight. Police officers standing at the entrance. Nathan had accused someone of stealing a valuable family heirloom, a ring that once belonged to Claire. The accusation left the staff in shock, and Ruby's heart sank when she realized the finger of blame was pointed squarely at her. "Do you have any idea what this ring means to me?" Nathan demanded, his voice cold and sharp. Ruby, stunned and hurt, denied the accusation, but Nathan wasn't ready to listen. As the officers began their investigation, Ruby could feel the fragile trust they had built start to crumble. And yet, she knew there was more to this situation than met the eye. The air in the Prescott mansion was heavy with tension. Ruby sat in silence in the parlor, her hands trembling as the officers questioned her about the missing ring. It felt like a nightmare one moment. She was trying to do her job and provide for Lily, and the next, she was being accused of a crime she didn't commit. Nathan's piercing gaze never left her, his expression a mixture of suspicion and disappointment. "I didn't take anything," Ruby said firmly, her voice shaking but resolute. "I would never steal from you." Nathan crossed his arms, his tone cold. "The ring didn't just vanish into thin air. It's one of the few things I have left of my sister, and I trusted you to respect this home." Ruby felt the weight of his words, but a part of her was filled with anger. How could he accuse her so easily? She thought about Lily, who was playing quietly upstairs, unaware of the storm brewing below. Ruby couldn't let this accusation ruin everything she'd worked for, not for her daughter's sake. The investigation continued, and as the officers searched the mansion, Ruby's mind raced. She knew she hadn't taken the ring, but who had, and why? It didn't take long for suspicion to turn toward Mrs. Lennox, whose curt demeanor and history of disapproving glances hadn't gone unnoticed. The officers questioned her as well, but she maintained her innocence, even suggesting that Ruby's financial struggles made her the more likely culprit. Amid the chaos, Lily appeared at the top of the staircase, holding a small velvet box in her hands. "Mommy, is this what everyone's looking for?" she called out, her voice innocent and full of curiosity. All eyes turned to Lily as she descended the stairs, clutching the box tightly. Ruby's heart dropped. Nathan strode over, snatching the box from Lily's hands and opening it to reveal the missing ring. "Where did you find this?" Nathan demanded, his voice sharp but controlled. Lily frowned, her little brows furrowed in confusion. "I found it in the garden by the big tree. I thought it was pretty, so I brought it inside to show Mommy, but I forgot about it." The room fell silent. Ruby's eyes filled with tears of relief, but also frustration. Nathan's accusations had wounded her deeply, and though the truth had come to light, the damage couldn't be undone so easily. Nathan stared at the ring in his hand, the realization of his mistake washing over him like a tidal wave. His voice softened as he turned to Ruby. I am sorry," he said, his words hesitant but genuine. "I jumped to conclusions, and I was wrong." Ruby looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't just accuse me of stealing," she said quietly. "You accused me of betraying your trust without even giving me the chance to defend myself. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Nathan was silent. For the first time in years, he was forced to confront the walls he had built around himself, the same walls that had made it so easy for him to suspect Ruby, despite all the good she had brought into his life. Later that evening, the house was quiet once more. Lily had fallen asleep in Ruby's arms after the ordeal, and Ruby sat by the fireplace, lost in thought. She knew Nathan's apology had been sincere, but it didn't erase the hurt she felt. She thought about Aaron and how different he had been, always quick to trust, always believing in the best of people. Nathan found Ruby in the parlor, standing hesitantly at the doorway. He looked less like the imposing millionaire she had met weeks ago, and more like a man grappling with his own regrets. "Ruby," he began, his voice low, "can I speak with you?" Ruby nodded, though she wasn't sure what she wanted to hear. Nathan stepped into the room, holding the ring in his hand. "This belonged to Claire," he said, sitting down across from her. "She gave it to me just before she passed away. It was her way of telling me to hold on to the things that mattered, the people who mattered. But I didn't listen. I shut everyone out instead." Ruby listened quietly, her heart softening despite herself. "Is something I need to tell you," Nathan continued. "When I saw that photograph the other day, it brought back memories. Memories of someone I haven't thought about in years. My sister's best friend, Aaron Hayes." He paused, studying Ruby's face for any sign of recognition. I think he was your husband." Ruby's breath caught in her throat. She had never spoken about Aaron to Nathan. And yet, here he was, connecting the pieces of their shared past. How do you know Aaron?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan explained everything, how Aaron had been like a brother to him, how they had drifted apart after Claire's death, and how he had always regretted losing touch. As he spoke, Ruby felt a surge of emotions: grief for Aaron, gratitude for the connection they had unknowingly shared, and a strange sense of destiny that had brought her to Nathan's home. "It seems we've been linked all along," Nathan said softly. "I don't know if that's fate or coincidence, but I do know one thing. I've wronged you, Ruby, and I want to make it right." Ruby looked at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. For the first time, she realized that Nathan wasn't just a man trapped by his wealth and past. He was someone searching for redemption, just as she was searching for stability and hope. "I don't need you to make things right," Ruby said finally. "I just need you to be better. For Lily, for yourself, and for the memory of the people we've both lost." Nathan nodded, her words cutting through the last of his defenses. He knew she was right. This was his chance to break free from the chains of his past and start anew. The next morning, Nathan decided to take the first step toward making amends. He invited Ruby and Lily to join him in the library, a space he had always kept private. Ruby hesitated at first, unsure of Nathan's intentions, but eventually agreed. When they arrived, they found Nathan seated at the large oak desk, a stack of old photo albums and letters spread out before him. "These belong to Claire," Nathan said, gesturing to the albums. "She kept everything: photos, notes, even silly mementos from trips we took as kids. After she passed, I locked these away because it hurt too much to look at them. But I think it's time I face those memories, and I want to share them with you." Ruby was taken aback by Nathan's vulnerability. For weeks, she had seen glimpses of the man behind the cold exterior, but this was the first time he had fully let his guard down. Lily, curious as ever, climbed onto Nathan's lap and began flipping through one of the albums. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing to a photo of Claire and Aaron standing side by side. Nathan smiled faintly. "That's Claire, my sister, and Aaron, your dad. They were best friends, inseparable. Aaron had this way of making everyone feel like they mattered. He was one of the best people I ever knew." Hearing Nathan speak about Aaron brought tears to Ruby's eyes. She had spent so much time mourning Aaron's loss that she had forgotten how many lives he had touched. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that Aaron's memory was still alive in the hearts of those who had known him. As they continued looking through the albums, Nathan shared stories about his childhood, his relationship with Claire, and the bond he had shared with Aaron. Ruby in turn opened up about her own journey, how she had met Aaron, their life together, and the challenges she had faced after his passing. The conversation was cathartic for both of them, and by the time the morning turned to afternoon, it was clear that the tension between them had eased. Nathan's apology wasn't just words. It was a genuine effort to bridge the gap between their lives and find common ground. But the day wasn't over yet. That evening, as Ruby prepared to leave, Nathan approached her with an idea. "I want to do something for Lily," he said. "For Aaron, too. I've been working on this idea for a while, and I think it's time to move forward with it." Ruby looked at him curiously. "What kind of idea?" Nathan hesitated for a moment before answering. "A foundation. Something that helps children like Lily kids who have so much potential but not enough opportunities. I want to name it after Claire and Aaron. They both believed in lifting others up, and I think it's time I do the same." Ruby was stunned by Nathan's proposal. It was more than she had ever expected, and it showed her just how much he had changed in the short time she had known him. Over the next few weeks, Nathan threw himself into the creation of the foundation, enlisting Ruby's help as a consultant. Though hesitant at first, Ruby quickly realized that her insights as a mother and her experiences with struggle made her uniquely qualified to contribute. Together, they brainstormed ideas for programs, fundraising, and outreach, with Nathan using his wealth and influence to bring the project to life. Lily, ever curious and full of energy, became a frequent visitor to Nathan's study, often drawing pictures or telling stories while he worked. Her presence brought a sense of warmth to the mansion that it hadn't seen in years, and Nathan found himself smiling more often than he ever thought possible. But not everyone was thrilled about the changes. Mrs. Lennox, who had served Nathan loyally for over a decade, struggled to accept Ruby's growing role in his life. She had always prided herself on maintaining order in the household, and Ruby's arrival had disrupted that balance. One evening, she approached Nathan with her concerns. "Mr. Prescott," she began cautiously, "I've always respected your decisions, but I can't help feeling that this arrangement with Ruby is causing unnecessary complications." Nathan looked at her thoughtfully. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Lennox," he said, his tone firm but kind. "But Ruby and Lily have brought something to this house that it desperately needed life. For years, I've let this place become a shrine to the past, but they've reminded me that tea here is more to life than memories. I hope you can see that too." Mrs. Lennox nodded, though her expression remained guarded. She didn't fully understand the depth of Nathan's transformation, but she respected him enough to trust his judgment. As the foundation began to take shape, Nathan hosted a small gathering at the mansion to introduce the project to potential donors and partners. Ruby was nervous about attending. She wasn't used to being in such an affluent crowd, but Nathan assured her that her presence was invaluable. During the event, Nathan gave a heartfelt speech about the inspiration behind the foundation, sharing his personal journey of loss and redemption. He spoke about Claire and Aaron, the lessons they had taught him, and how Ruby and Lily had reignited his hope for the future. When he finished, the room erupted into applause, and Ruby couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. For the first time, she saw Nathan not as a distant and guarded businessman, but as a man determined to make a difference. The evening ended with Nathan pulling Ruby aside to thank her. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said sincerely. "You've shown me what it means to care again. I'll always be grateful for that." Ruby smiled, her heart full. "And I'll always be grateful for what you've done for Lily. Aaron would have been proud of you, Nathan. I know I am." The weeks that followed the foundation's launch were a whirlwind of activity. Nathan, once reclusive and detached, became fully immersed in the project, meeting with educators, community leaders, and advocates for children's welfare. Ruby, now officially a part of the foundation's advisory board, worked alongside him, using her insights to ensure that the programs would truly benefit struggling families like hers. For Ruby, this new role was a life-changing experience. She had always been resilient, finding ways to make ends meet for Lily, but she had never imagined herself in a position where she could help others on such a large scale. The foundation became a source of purpose for her, and every success felt like a victory not just for her, but for Aaron's memory as well. Meanwhile, the mansion underwent a transformation of its own. What had once been a cold and lifeless space began to hum with energy and warmth. Nathan opened the estate's vast grounds to host events for the foundation, inviting children and families from all walks of life to participate in workshops, games, and celebrations. Lily, with her boundless curiosity and charm, quickly became a favorite among the staff and visitors. She had a knack for making people smile, and her bond with Nathan only grew stronger. They spent hours playing chess, a game Nathan had taught her, and Lily often insisted on teaching him card games in return. One sunny afternoon, Nathan invited Ruby and Lily to join him for a picnic on the mansion's expansive lawn. As they sat beneath the shade of a large oak tree, enjoying sandwiches and lemonade, Nathan surprised them with an announcement. "I've been thinking about how much this foundation means to me," he began, "and how much it's been shaped by both of you. I want to officially rename it the Prescott Scott Foundation, in honor of Aaron and everything he stood for." Ruby was speechless. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at Nathan, her gratitude evident. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Nathan smiled. "You don't have to say anything. This is as much your legacy as it is mine. As the foundation grew, so did the connections between Nathan, Ruby, and Lily. The walls Nathan had built around himself for years were now completely gone, replaced by a genuine openness that surprised even him. He found joy in the simplest moments, helping Lily with her school projects, sharing meals with Ruby, and hearing the laughter that now filled his once empty home. Even Mrs. Lennox, who had initially been skeptical of Ruby's influence, found herself softening. One evening, as she watched Ruby help Lily with her homework at the kitchen table, she approached quietly and placed a hand on Ruby's shoulder. "You've brought something special to this house," Mrs. Lennox said. "I see now why Mr. Prescott values you so much. Thank you for reminding him and all of us what it means to live again." Ruby was touched by Mrs. Lennox's words. Though they had started off on rocky ground, she had come to respect the housekeeper's dedication and attention to detail. "Thank you, Mrs. Lennox. That means a lot coming from you." As the mansion continued to evolve into a place of life and hope, Nathan received a surprise visit from his mentor, Dr. Regina Collins. She had been a quiet supporter of his transformation from the sidelines, but seeing the progress firsthand moved her deeply. "You've done something remarkable here, Nathan," Dr. Collins said, her voice filled with pride. "This foundation, this home, it's everything Claire and Aaron would have wanted. They'd be proud of you, just as I am." Nathan nodded, feeling a swell of emotion. For years he had avoided conversations about Claire and Aaron, fearing the pain of their loss. But now, he realized that keeping their memories alive through his actions was the greatest tribute he could give them. The transformation was most evident during the Foundation's inaugural community event. Families filled the mansion's grounds, enjoying food, games, and activities designed to inspire and empower children. Nathan watched from the sidelines as Lily played with other kids, her laughter echoing across the lawn. Ruby stood beside him, her expression one of pure joy. "This is just the beginning," Nathan said softly. "Here is so much more we can do." Ruby smiled, her heart full. "And we'll do it together." Months passed, and the Prescott Scott Foundation flourished, becoming a beacon of hope for countless families. Nathan, once a lonely and withdrawn millionaire, had transformed into a man deeply committed to making a difference. His mansion, once a cold and desolate place, was now a hub of activity and joy, with the sound of children's laughter filling its halls. Ruby's life had also changed in ways she could never have imagined. With Nathan's support, she and Lily had moved into a cozy new home in a welcoming neighborhood. The house, a gift from Nathan, was simple yet beautiful, with a garden that Lily immediately claimed as her magic forest. Ruby found herself thriving in her new role with the foundation. She had discovered a passion for advocacy and helping others, and her insights as a mother and widow brought a unique perspective to the team. Through her work, she met families facing struggles similar to her own, and found a deep sense of purpose in supporting them. Nathan and Lily's bond had grown stronger with time. Every weekend, Nathan visited their new home, often bringing books or games for Lily. The two spent hours playing chess, reading stories, or simply talking about life. For Lily, Nathan had become a beloved figure, part mentor, part father figure, and entirely irreplaceable. On a warm spring evening, Ruby invited Nathan to dinner at their new home. It was a simple meal, but the warmth and love around the table made it feel like a celebration. As they ate, Nathan couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed since Ruby and Lily had entered it. After dinner, as the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lily turned to Nathan with a question that made his heart swell. "Uncle Nathan," she asked, her voice soft, "do you think my daddy is proud of us?" Nathan's eyes filled with emotion as he answered, "I know he is, Lily. He'd be so proud of you and your moment. I hope he'd be proud of me too." Ruby placed a hand on Nathan's arm, her eyes filled with gratitude. "He would be, Nathan. I know he would." The impact of their journey extended far beyond their own lives. The Prescott Scott Foundation became a cornerstone of the community, funding educational programs, scholarships, and recreational activities for children in need. Nathan and Ruby worked tirelessly to ensure that the foundation remained true to its mission, and their efforts were met with overwhelming support. One day, Nathan received a letter from a young girl who had attended one of the foundation's programs. In her note, She described how the scholarship she had received allowed her to pursue her dream of becoming a doctor. She thanked Nathan for giving her a chance and promised to one day pay it forward. Reading the letter, Nathan felt a profound sense of fulfillment. It was a reminder of why he had started this journey and how far he had come. He framed the letter and placed it on his desk as a daily source of inspiration. Ruby, too, found herself deeply moved by the stories of those the foundation had helped. She often thought of Aaron, imagining how proud he would be of what they had accomplished. Though she still missed him every day, she felt his presence in the work she did and the life she was building with Lily. The final piece of Nathan's transformation came during a community event held at the mansion. Families from all over the city gathered to celebrate the foundation's achievements, enjoying food, games, and performances. Nathan stood on the stage, looking out at the crowd, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. As he began his speech, he paused to acknowledge the two people who had changed his life forever. "I want to thank Ruby and Lily Scott," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "They reminded me of what it means to care, to hope, and to believe in the power of connection. This foundation wouldn't exist without them, and I owe them more than I can ever express." The crowd erupted into applause, and Ruby, standing in the audience with Lily by her side, felt her heart swell with pride. In the final scene, Nathan, Ruby, Lily, and a small group of close friends shared a quiet dinner at the mansion. As they laughed and shared stories, the once empty house felt alive in a way it hadn't for years. Looking around the table, Nathan thought of something Claire had once told him. "Sometimes, the family we build is even more powerful than the one we're born into." And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace. As Nathan Prescott and Ruby Scott rebuild their lives through forgiveness and a legacy of hope, miles away another mansion hides its own secrets. There, a single photograph, dusty and long forgotten, awaits to unravel a parallel tale of loss, regret, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Maxwell Grant had it all: wealth, influence, and a sprawling mansion tucked away in the most exclusive part of the city. But what good were riches when his heart ached from a loss that could never be replaced? Maxwell was a man defined by his empire, a businessman whose success came at the price of everything else. For years he had lived in the shadow of an unbearable grief, the untimely death of his wife Clara and their young son Luke. A car crash had taken them from him in the blink of an eye, and though time had passed, the ache never did. His once vibrant home, filled with laughter and light, now sat in silence. Maxwell's mansion, though grand in size, was empty of warmth, and the photographs of his lost family only served as cruel reminders of what he no longer had. No matter how much he worked, no matter how many deals he closed, the void in his heart remained untouched by wealth. Then there was Lucy Adams, a woman whose life was filled with struggle and love in equal measure. As a single mother to two young children, Lucy fought every day to keep a roof over their heads. The pressure of her two jobs often left her exhausted, but she never gave up. Lucy's life was a balancing act, each day a tightrope between hardship and hope. One fateful day, Lucy's path crossed with Maxwell's. She was hired as a cleaner for his mansion, a job that she had taken to provide for her children, though she was hesitant about entering such an unfamiliar world. The first time she stepped into the grand estate, she felt like a tiny fish in an ocean of wealth. The marble floors, the elegant furniture, and the gilded wallsit all seemed so distant from her reality. Maxwell himself had become a mere ghost in his own home. He rarely made appearances, retreating to his private penthouse most of the time. When he did come to the mansion, his presence was cold, almost mechanical. He moved from room to room, his sharp suits a stark contrast to the blank expression he wore. In those rare moments of stillness, Maxwell would stand alone, staring at old photographs of his family. They were his only link to a life he once cherished, and yet they felt more like a prison than a memory. Meanwhile, Lucy adjusted to the mansion's routines, trying to ignore the distance that seemed to stretch between her and the wealthy man who owned it. But what she couldn't ignore was the sadness she felt emanating from him. Maxwell's isolation was palpable, and something about it tugged at her heart. One afternoon, as Lucy was dusting off the shelves in Maxwell's study, something caught her eye. Nestled among a stack of old books was a small, framed photograph. Her curiosity piqued. Lucy gently picked it up, only to freeze as she stared at the faces in the picture. The image depicted a young family, Maxwell, Clara, and a young boy who must have been no older than 5 years old. The boy's smile was infectious, his eyes filled with mischief. It was clear that this photo held precious memories for Maxwell. Lucy's heart ached as she recognized the resemblance to her own children. It was an image of a family, full of life and love, now lost to time. She wasn't sure what compelled her to take the photo, but she found herself clutching it tightly, as though it were her own. Maxwell had never spoken much about his past. His grief was something unspoken, a quiet sorrow that seemed to haunt every corner of the mansion. For weeks, Lucy kept the photo hidden in her apron, unsure of what to do with it. It wasn't her place to pry into the personal history of a man who had hired her simply to clean his home. But something inside her urged her to learn more, to understand the sadness that Maxwell seemed to carry wherever he went. One day, as Lucy was cleaning Maxwell's office, she noticed him standing near the window, staring out into the vast garden below. His posture was stiff, his gaze distant, as though he was lost in thought. The silence between them was palpable, until finally, Maxwell spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wonder how things could have been different?" he asked, his tone weary. Lucy, taken aback by the rare moment of vulnerability, paused in her cleaning. She glanced at the man who seemed to have everything but was clearly torn by something deeper. It was a side of him she had never seen before, and it pulled at her heart. She hesitated before answering, unsure of how much to say. "I suppose," she replied softly, not wanting to intrude. "But sometimes, the past is just too painful to look at." Maxwell didn't respond right away, his gaze lingering on the photograph on his desk. Lucy noticed how his eyes lingered on the picture of his family, the same photograph she had found weeks earlier. Something seemed to shift in him, as if the weight of his memories had become too much to bear. Maxwell's transformation didn't happen overnight, but Lucy could sense the subtle shifts in him. As the days passed, he began to talk more, sharing fragments of his past that he had kept hidden for so long. It started with small gestures, letting Lucy in on a piece of the past each day. His words, though few, carried weight. He spoke of his childhood, of his family, and the tragedy that had shaken his life to its core. It was a side of Maxwell she had never seen before, the pain of a man who had once known love, who had once known happiness. One afternoon, after he had confided in her about the loss of his brother in a tragic accident years ago, Lucy noticed the photograph once again. The boy in the picture, the one who had been smiling so brightly, had been Maxwell's younger brother. The pain in Maxwell's eyes deepened as he spoke of the man he had once been so close to, his best friend, his sibling. He told Lucy how he wished things could have been different, how the loss of his brother had changed him forever. Meanwhile, Lucy continued to try and balance her own life, never far from her children, who still lived with her estranged mother. The distance between her and her children was something she struggled with every day. But even as she cleaned Maxwell's mansion and listened to his tales of sorrow, she found herself longing for the kind of family she had once dreamed of. Ethan, her son, had always been her light. He was the one person who could make her smile even on the darkest days. But there was something about Maxwell's quiet sorrow that moved her deeply. Slowly, she began to see the parallels between their lives: pain of losing family, the desire for connection, and the emotional distance that had driven both of them to retreat into their own worlds. Maxwell's quiet transformation was not without its challenges. It wasn't long before Lucy realized that he had been keeping more than just family secrets. There were still questions unanswered about the people in his life. She had seen the way his eyes would linger on certain objects, small trinkets or mementos that hinted at an unresolved part of his past. But what intrigued Lucy the most was the old letter Maxwell kept locked away in his drawer. She had caught a glimpse of it once, and the handwritten words seemed to call out to her, beckoning her to know more. With Ethan visiting the mansion one afternoon, Lucy's son unknowingly entered Maxwell's study and stumbled upon one of Maxwell's family heirlooms, a piece of jewelry that seemed to have significant sentimental value. Ethan had always been curious, his innocent gaze uncovering things that even Lucy hadn't noticed. When he handed Maxwell the ring, something in the air shifted. Maxwell looked at Ethan with a mixture of surprise and hesitation. For a moment it seemed as though time had stood still. Ethan's innocent smile seemed to trigger something in Maxwell, a memory, a sense of regret, and the beginning of a change that would force him to confront the past he had been running from for so long. The days that followed that moment with Ethan in the ring were filled with tension and uncertainty. Maxwell had never fully understood the power of a single object, a simple ring, so insignificant to most, but so deeply meaningful to him. The moment he held the ring, a flood of memories rushed to him. He remembered the day it was given to him, the day it was meant to symbolize the unity of his family. That ring had been passed down through generations, carrying with it a history of love and loss. It had always been a symbol of hope, a promise of connection, until it was lost in time and buried under the weight of grief. The truth about the ring slowly began to unravel. Maxwell couldn't escape it any longer, the long-buried emotions that had been shoved aside for years. He felt a growing sense of guilt, a deep shame for the family he had left behind, for the brother he had distanced himself from. The ring was not just a memento of his lost brother. It was a reminder of everything he had abandoned, every person he had turned his back on in the name of success and wealth. Lucy had been observant, and the pieces were starting to fall into place. She had always known Maxwell was hiding something, and now she was starting to understand the depth of his pain. But as much as she wanted to ask him about it, she knew that it wasn't her place to pry into his past. Still, the curiosity gnawed at her, and one day, after another long conversation about loss and regret, Lucy couldn't hold back any longer. She confronted Maxwell about the ring. Maxwell, usually a man of few words, struggled to explain the significance of the ring. He spoke of his brother, of how their bond had been broken when they had a falling out. It was a story of family betrayal, of miscommunication, and ultimately, of regret. Maxwell admitted to Lucy that he had been running away from the truth for years, hiding behind his wealth, behind his cold exterior, afraid to face the reality of what he had done to his family. The revelation hit Lucy hard. She realized that Maxwell wasn't the man he had once been. The pain in his eyes was real, the loneliness so profound that it threatened to swallow him whole. But there was also a quiet vulnerability in him now, a willingness to face the pain head-on and confront the past he had long avoided. As they talked, Ethan, innocent and unaware of the emotional weight of the conversation, walked into the room with a drawing he had made. It was a picture of a family: Maxwell, Lucy, and Ethan, standing together with their arms around each other, smiling. The simplicity of the image struck a chord in both Maxwell and Lucy. Ethan's innocence and unwavering hope seemed to pierce through the darkness that had shrouded Maxwell for so long. But their conversation was interrupted when Ethan suddenly collapsed to the floor, clutching his side in pain. Panic surged through Maxwell's veins as he rushed to Ethan's side, calling for help. It was in that moment, with Ethan lying unconscious in his arms, that Maxwell fully realized how much he had changed. The fear of losing Ethan was greater than any of the pain from his past. For the first time in years, Maxwell understood the true meaning of family and the lengths he would go to protect it. Maxwell stood frozen, the photo pressed lightly in his hands as he stared down at it. The light from the pawn shop's display case glinted off the glass frame, illuminating the faces in the photo: two young men, smiling, their arms around each other as they stood in front of a modest house. It was an image of innocence, of family bonds that had long since been severed. The photo captured a time Maxwell had buried deep in his past, when he and his brother Leo had been inseparable. As his fingers gently traced the edges of the photo, memories of his childhood flooded back: the laughter, the late-night conversations, and the dreams they had shared. But those days were long gone. Leo was gone, and so were the days of shared happiness. What remained now was only guilt and regret. Maxwell's heart pounded in his chest, his mind reeling with the realization that this image was not just a memory, but a reminder of everything he had lost. His brother had been the light in his life, the one person who understood him in ways no one else did. Yet their last conversation had been a bitter argument, a clash of egos, driven by pride and misunderstandings. He had never meant to lose Leo, but in the pursuit of wealth and success, Maxwell had neglected the one relationship that truly mattered. The shopkeeper, an older man with a weathered face, watched Maxwell closely. He had seen many people come and go, But there was something about the way Maxwell held the photo, something in his eyes, that told the shopkeeper this man was not just another customer. There was a pain here, a deep, unspoken grief. Maxwell's fingers clenched around the photo, the glass digging into his skin as he forced himself to look away. He had never been good at dealing with emotions, never allowed himself to grieve. He had built walls around himself, focusing on work, on accumulating wealth, on proving to the world that he was successful, that he was above the heartbreak of his past. But now, those walls were crumbling, and he was face to face with the raw reality of what he had lost. A rush of anger surged through him, anger at himself, at his pride, at the choices he had made. The photo was a symbol of everything he had sacrificed for his career, everything he had neglected in the name of ambition. But as the rage simmered, a cold truth settled deep within him. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't bring Leo back. And the only thing left to do now was to confront the reality of what had happened. Maxwell took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the emotions were too overwhelming. His mind raced as he thought about how he could have prevented the fallout with Leo, how he could have been a better brother, a better person. The realization hit him hard. He had spent so many years chasing after material wealth, but it had come at the expense of the one thing that truly mattered: family. Maxwell's hands trembled as he slowly placed the photo back on the counter. He stared at it for a long time, his mind lost in a whirlwind of emotions. He wanted to look away, to ignore the reality it represented, but he couldn't. This was his past, a past he had long since buried under layers of success and power. Yet here it was, staring him in the face, reminding him of the one thing he had neglected all these years: the love of his family. The shopkeeper, noticing Maxwell's distress, cleared his throat. He had seen many customers over the years, but rarely had he witnessed such raw emotion. Maxwell's struggle was palpable, and the shopkeeper felt a strange pull to speak. "You know," he said, his voice low and gentle, "sometimes the past has a way of finding us, even when we think we've left it behind." Maxwell didn't answer. He couldn't find the words. He wanted to shout, to scream, to demand answers from the universe. But instead, he stood there, completely still, as the weight of the past pressed down on him. The shopkeeper's gaze softened, and he nodded toward the counter. "You were very close to him, weren't you?" Maxwell finally lifted his eyes, meeting the shopkeeper's gaze for the first time. He could see the understanding in the old man's eyes, and it struck him hard. How could this stranger know so much without saying a word? The shopkeeper's expression was not one of pity, but of recognition of the pain Maxwell had carried for years, hidden deep inside. Maxwell swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. I didn't protect him. I wasn't there when he needed me. I thought he was weak. I thought if I pushed him away, it would make me stronger." His words were barely a whisper, but they felt like a confession, a release of the guilt that had consumed him for so long. The shopkeeper didn't say anything in response. He simply nodded, letting Maxwell speak. There was nothing to say, really. Maxwell knew it now. The truth had always been there, buried beneath the surface. His brother's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was the result of his own actions, his own inability to truly connect, to open up, to love freely without the constraints of pride and ego. Maxwell turned his back to the counter, struggling to hold back the tears that threatened to escape. The emotions were overwhelming, flooding him all at once. He had built a fortress around himself, but now, standing in front of this photo, that fortress was collapsing. He couldn't keep running from the past any longer. Just as the woman's calming presence began to settle Maxwell's mind, the sound of a door creaking open from the back of the shop interrupted them. Another man, much older, walked in, his eyes wide with surprise upon seeing Maxwell. The recognition was instant, and for a brief moment, the weight of history hung between them. Maxwell stiffened as the older man approached, his face a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "Maxwell? Is that really you?" the man asked, his voice shaking. Maxwell stood frozen for a second, feeling the floor shift beneath him. He hadn't expected this moment to come, hadn't prepared himself for the confrontation. But there he was, standing in front of the man who held the missing piece of his past, the man who had once been a vital part of his life. The older man's voice cracked again. "It's been so many years. I thought I'd never see you again. What happened to you? Where have you been?" Maxwell's heart pounded in his chest, each beat reverberating through his body like a drum. The old man's words seemed to hang in the air, thick with years of silence and lost time. His face, weathered and lined with age, was filled with both disbelief and longing. Maxwell took a shaky step back, his hands gripping the photograph tightly. He began, his voice breaking with emotion, but the words got stuck in his throat. It was like something inside him had been unlocked, the dam of unresolved feelings threatening to spill over. The older man's eyes softened, the years of bitterness and hurt melting away as he stepped closer. "I didn't know where you went," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After everything that happened, I thought you had abandoned us. But now, seeing you here, after all this time, it feels like I've been given a second chance." Maxwell looked down at the photo again, the image of his late brother staring back at him. The photo had triggered a flood of memories, the good ones and the bad, the moments of happiness, and those filled with regret. He had pushed all of this aside for so long, burying the pain beneath layers of work, wealth, and the illusion of control. But here, in the quiet of the pawn shop, surrounded by relics of the past, everything felt painfully raw and real. The woman, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward once more, her presence a calm contrast to the storm of emotion swirling in the room. She reached out gently, placing a hand on Maxwell's arm, offering him a silent but profound support. Her gesture spoke volume as she was there, no judgment, just compassion. And for the first time in years, Maxwell felt it. The weight of his guilt, the distance between him and his family, was beginning to shift. "I am sorry," Maxwell managed to whisper, the words coming out thick with emotion. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't know how to deal with what happened, and I pushed everyone away." His voice faltered as the gravity of his own admission settled in. It felt like the first real step toward healing, the first acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he could make peace with his past. The older man reached out, his hands trembling slightly as he took hold of Maxwell's shoulders. "It's never too late to fix things," he said quietly, his voice filled with an unspoken understanding. "But it has to start with you. It's up to you to take that first step." Maxwell felt the weight of the words sink in. In that moment, as the past and present collided, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't undo the mistakes, the years of separation, or the harshness that had divided them. But he could begin again, and that was something worth fighting for. The shopkeeper, who had been quietly observing, nodded subtly. He had seen it before, people who were searching for closure, for redemption, for the chance to rebuild what was lost. And he knew that Maxwell was standing on the edge of something new, a chance to reclaim the family he thought he had lost forever. Maxwell's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of hope, of possibility. He looked at the photograph one last time and then gently placed it into the older man's hands. "I've spent so long running from my past, but I am ready to face it now. With you," he said, his voice steadying. The older man held the photograph close to his chest, his eyes welling up with emotion as he nodded. "It's all we can do. Start from here." The woman stepped back slightly, allowing them space, but her presence remained a steady anchor for Maxwell. She knew that the real work had only just begun, but for the first time in years, Maxwell seemed ready to embrace it. And as they stood together in the dimly lit pawn shop, the future, uncertain but full of promise, seemed just a little bit clearer. The dust had finally settled, but Maxwell's heart was still racing. He had spent years trying to outrun his past, drowning himself in the distractions of his wealth and success. Yet, standing in that pawn shop, holding the photograph of his lost brother, he had found something far more valuable than any material possession. He'd found a piece of his soul he thought he had lost forever. Maxwell left the shop with the old photograph carefully tucked inside his coat pocket, his footsteps heavy with the weight of the journey ahead. The woman who had been his silent observer had offered him no promises or guarantees, but her unwavering support had made all the difference. As they walked side by side, she didn't speak much. She didn't need to. The silence between them was filled with unspoken understanding, a bond formed through shared experiences and a mutual recognition of the pain they had both endured. The air was crisp, the world around them calm, as if the universe had somehow paused to allow Maxwell the time he needed to process everything. The city that had always seemed so loud and overwhelming now felt distant, as if Maxwell was seeing it with new eyes. As they arrived at Maxwell's mansion, he paused before entering. The towering walls of the house had once felt like a fortress, a place of isolation where he could hide from everything. But now those same walls felt more like a prison, a reminder of the years he had spent pushing people away. He knew it was time for a change, for a new beginning. The woman beside him smiled gently, as if she had sensed his thoughts. "This place doesn't define you," she said softly. "You do." Maxwell nodded, the words sinking in deeper than he expected. The mansion, with all its grandeur and opulence, was just a house. But his choices, his actions, his willingness to make amends, that was what would define him from now on. The days following that pivotal moment in the pawn shop were filled with quiet reflection for Maxwell. He made the decision to reach out to his estranged family, his brother's widow, his nieces, and nephews, and slowly, the walls of silence that had stood between them for so long began to crack. It wasn't easy, and not everyone was ready to forgive him. But each step forward felt like a small victory. Maxwell's mansion began to feel more like a home than it ever had. He opened the doors to those he had once distanced himself from, inviting family, friends, and even the woman who had helped him through this difficult journey. The once empty halls now echoed with laughter and conversation, and Maxwell began to see the house as a place of possibility, not a reminder of his failures. The photograph of his late brother, now framed and displayed prominently in his study, served as a daily reminder of the past he had come to terms with. But it was more than that. It was a symbol of everything Maxwell had learned, the emotional breakthrough that had shifted his perspective on life and family. The woman who had been there for him, the one who had offered her support without question, watched as Maxwell slowly rebuilt the connections he had lost. And while she never sought praise or recognition, Maxwell knew that her quiet strength had played a pivotal role in his transformation. As Maxwell sat in the garden one evening, surrounded by his family, he realized that he had finally come home, not just to a physical place, but to himself. The bitterness, the regret, and the years of isolation had been replaced by something far more precious. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, Maxwell felt ready to face it with an open heart. The woman sat beside him, her presence a calm reassurance as the sun dipped below the horizon. "You've made it this far," she said quietly, her voice soft but firm. "Now, it's time to live the life you were meant to." Maxwell looked at her and smiled, a genuine smile, the kind that had been absent for far too long. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude, "for everything." And as the night settled around them, Maxwell knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with love, redemption, and the promise of a future he had once thought impossible. The months that followed were a testament to the power of healing and redemption. Maxwell had made significant changes, both within himself and in the world around him. The once grand mansion, which had been a symbol of his loneliness, now felt vibrant and alive, filled with the sounds of family and laughter. Where silence had reigned for so many years, now there was warmth, real, palpable warmth. Maxwell had mended his broken relationships, reaching out to his family, and the reunion had been slow but meaningful. It wasn't always easy. Not everyone could forgive the past so easily. However, with each step forward, Maxwell proved that he was more than just the man who had pushed people away. He was someone capable of growth, someone willing to open his heart and make the changes necessary to rebuild what had been lost. He had also begun a project that reflected his deep sense of regret and his desire to make up for the years he had spent isolating himself. Maxwell established a foundation for underprivileged children, using his wealth and resources to provide opportunities for those who needed it most. The foundation quickly became a hub for change, a place where children from all walks of life could find hope and guidance. It was his way of giving back, not just for his own peace of mind, but for the future of the next generation. Meanwhile, the woman who had been by his side throughout this journey had become more than just an ally. She had transformed from a stranger offering help into a trusted friend, and Maxwell had come to realize that she had been a guiding light in the darkest period of his life. He was deeply grateful for her support, for the way she had never wavered in her belief that he could change. One evening, Maxwell sat in his study, now filled with photographs of family, friends, and moments of success. The framed picture of his brother, the one that had started it all, sat on the mantelpiece. He gazed at it for a moment, reflecting on everything he had learned, how much he had hurt, how much he had gained, and how much he still had to give. He wasn't the same man he had been when he first stepped into that pawn shop. He wasn't the lonely billionaire hiding from his past anymore. He had opened his heart, repaired his relationships, and found a purpose far beyond his wealth. But perhaps the most significant change was the way he had come to understand what truly mattered: love, connection, and the ability to forgive. As he sat there, a soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was the woman, standing in the doorway with a gentle smile on her face. Maxwell stood up and motioned for her to come in. They exchanged no words, but the mutual understanding between them was enough. Their journey together had brought them to this momentous moment of calm after the storm, a moment of quiet reflection on all that had been accomplished. Maxwell had come to realize that life wasn't about the things you accumulate or the accolades you receive. It was about the people you meet along the way, the connections you form, and the way you choose to make a difference in the world. The mansion, the foundation, the new relationships, all of it was proof that even in the face of overwhelming loss, there was always a chance for redemption, for starting over, and for rebuilding something beautiful. In the final moments, Maxwell walked outside into the garden, where the evening sun cast a golden glow over the space. His family had gathered, laughing and talking while the children played nearby. The warmth of the moment filled him with a deep sense of peace he had long been searching for. As he stood there, watching the scene unfold, Maxwell knew that he was finally home. The woman joined him outside, and they both stood in silence, watching the life they had built together. No words were needed. It was clear that the road ahead, though uncertain, would be one filled with hope. They had come full circle, and for the first time in a long time, Maxwell was content. Sometimes, he thought to himself, the people we least expect to make an impact are the ones who change us the most.